Yo, what's happening? Name's Raheem Flowers. We live in a really bizarre times right now to where you have people who transform into transvestites and they're creating artificial babies. And if you've read any article about it, they're talking about these alleged pregnancies that have emerged. So this is what we got to prepare for in the 2020s. We only have 4 more months of this decade. We have the transvestites and we have the the thought bots that are an extension of transhumanism. See, I've taken it upon myself to get into cybernetics, considering that we use social media and by default, especially if you're a part of this decade, you can't get away from that. So that's why I make it a mission to speak on it, because we live in a cybernetic Babylon, as I've been stating for quite some time. You feel me? And I also just think about the things that go on in the so-called black community. I've stated before, when we move, the world moves. And what our women do and black men do really becomes a chain reaction and a domino effect. That's why when I look at stories about a black woman who's married to her white husband and they get into a dispute and a fight over a film movie, I think that's asinine. Make no mistake, when you have interracial dating, marriages being promoted, you have homosexuality in these so-called Pride 7 Deadly Sin parade being a national or an annual holiday. This holiday, just know that this is all an extension of discord, chaos, obscenity, and anything that just goes against the creator and just natural laws in general. I don't sit here dictating what people should and shouldn't do with their life. I'm not here to have no moral argument or make a moral judgment. I'm just saying that it's unnatural. Alright? Plain and simple. There needs to be parameters set. Like, even thinking about all these interracial dating, and me briefly speaking about that black woman and that white man getting dispute over a slavery film, that's because dynamically, one at one point was dominant over the other, but then again, black men, or the so-called Moors, were dominant of white women. There was a sex slave trade that was going on prior to what we know as the Atlantic slave trade. There are, like I said, chain reactions to all these events that we know today, but everything needs to be put in proper context before we can even make an objective opinion or make any sort of assessment. You can't just be driven by emotions and make yourself out to be a victim. Like, take Nicki Minaj. She makes herself out to be a victim in the industry, but that bitch has been a bully, but she's getting a taste of her own medicine by another thought like Cardi B. So that's just a karmic reaction. Back when Nicki Minaj was new and Little Kim dissed her and she said what she said and that transpired. So everybody has to look at things like this. Think about it metaphysically, and then you think about how you treat people. And a lot of people won't forget how you treated them. So karma's a bitch, like you, Nikki, but you're a narcissistic one at that. I heard what you were saying on Joe Budden's podcast. You made everything about you. I understand that they were asking questions that directly pertain to you, but somehow it all came full circle about a Nicki Minaj show. I get it. On Queen Radio, that's your platform. But can you just expand outside of self? You can't speak about another man's ego and talk about how Joe doesn't want to be challenged by women and whatnot, but what do? You date a bunch of simps. Simps ain't gonna challenge you. And Meek's included in that shit too. So that's my take on that. I see a lot of things in the world that need reformation. Seriously. I've been looking to be the mastermind of what goes on in this world, not just the 2020s, since I was a kid in high school. Back in 2010, I started this journey as a 17 going on 18-year-old. And now that I'm 27 and I'll be 28 next year, oh man, I'm assembling the Super Friends just in the cybernetic sense. You know? You can't build an empire alone. Whether we talk about the Sumerians. Oh, speaking of the Sumerians, see, this is what I also meant. This is what I want to say as far as like setting parameters. See, these great civilizations that we know, like these are things that I just learned, like the Namu's law. This was a law back in like the 2000s BC. And you can tell that those things apply today in the Middle East, or what we call the Middle East or Western Asia, where you look at people, if they commit adultery or the punishment that many women receive, and if you do anything related to theft and things of that nature, like they apply that to this day because that's how powerful those laws were and that's how effective those laws are. When you have something that is solid, a foundation that is solid and effective, then you have to keep those roots intact. You know? It's unfortunate that so many so-called black people didn't do that. Like, if you even think about it, and you can even chalk it down to gangs, think about it with Larry Hoover, think about it with David Barksdale, and they integrated the gang, the Black Disciples and the Gangster Disciples. But then as soon as the government stuck their nose in it, David Barksdale died, I believe, from a heart attack. Larry Hoover was locked up in Colorado. What happened? The gang just started having all these war zones. Now, yes, you could say, well, the BDs and the GDs have been at it since the 70s and the 80s and whatnot, but point is they integrated, and whether they wanted to do that or not, or whether that was planned or something that was not unanimous, that was a unanimous agreement, it was something that worked. People had the people nation, the folk nation, and whatnot. Point is, the reason why I'm using these gangs as analogies is because when people form unions and people come together, regardless of how they feel about each other, and even if there's infighting, there is still progress being made. Isn't that why the GDs also call themselves growth and development? Yeah. That's why even Fred Hampton, the other faction of the Black Panthers in Chicago, had these lunch programs. Now, I'm not with the fact that they reject the creator and they are in support of things like Maoism and Marxism, things that have nothing beneficial to so-called black people. Nothing beneficial to black men, nothing beneficial to black women, and you even had bedwenches like Angela Davis that were part of Black Panthers. You had women in the Black Panthers who ratted out other black men. These are facts. The best way to get to a man is through their women. And that's just something that's been shown historically. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't, have an intimate relationship with a woman. Just be careful and be mindful. Because even your own homies and your own dudes could backstab you and betray you. You know? So that's my take on that. Where do we see the world today? And where will we see it tomorrow? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves. So I'm going to leave it at that for now while I'm masterminding, thinking of a master plan. Peace.